Hello students, we're going to look at some ecological inventories and some different ways that you can do them. This is one particular way. The student chose Taco John's, and we were looking at that restaurant and realizing the skills that people who attend Taco John's need to have. There's two things I'd like to point out. Typically when we do an ecological inventory, and for your assignment, I'd like you to have 3 sub-environments. So our main environment here is Taco John's, which is the restaurant. And the 3 sub-environments that these students chose were the counter, the table, and also the bathroom and the drink station. So they actually have 4 different sub-environments within the Taco John's restaurant in this ecological inventory. When we start to think about what we do or typical people do when they go into different environments, we observe. So sometimes what we think people do is not actually what we observe. We all know table manners, for example, but if you go into a high school lunchroom or even an elementary lunchroom, we don't always see table manners or the typical table manners that we would expect to see if we were teaching table manners. And so that can be one reason to do an ecological inventory, is to make sure that we're teaching skills that are appropriate for the environment we are preparing the student for. We do not hear a lot of formal language necessarily at an elementary lunch table, but we do hear conversation among students. So what types of language do we need to teach a student with more severe or cognitive disabilities so that they can participate in that conversation at lunchtime with their peers? So when we go to the counter of the Taco John's restaurant, we see different things that are happening. We have the skill of waiting in line, the skill of ordering, and the skill of needing to know money and how to manage it in order to pay for the order. What are some language? We should have some conversation starters, and we should be able to stand in one spot as we're waiting in line. Ordering, somebody needs to be able to choose what they want, and they need to have the language or assistive technology or some type of communication device that they can say, can I get number 4 or 5? I would also like to have. And then we have writing the check for the correct amount, and we need addition, subtraction, and change skills. These are all the skills that we need when going to the counter of Taco John's. Here we see the table. Conversation. I sometimes like it, I think it's easier to read sometimes if we put all the skills this way, and then all the language that is needed here. So what kind of skills do you need? Well, you need to be able to hold a conversation. You need to have table manners, and you need to be able to clean up. What language do we need to go with those? So you can see how this is set up here. Now here they do a nice job of laying out actual language that might be used. Is someone in that stall? Is this the line? Those types of things. And then again, the different skills, and the skills are broken down even more precisely. This is one example of an ecological inventory. Another example, and probably one of my favorite forms, and this is the one I really encourage you to use for your assignment, is to come up with the environment and then again the sub-environment. And then why is this activity needed for this student? Is it something that they need right now in the current environment, or is it something that we anticipate they'll need in the future? Or is it something the student just likes and therefore we want them to be able to participate in that environment? Is it something the family enjoys and would like the student to be able to participate in that environment? Or here we go, is it valued by students' social groups? Because we want our students to be with their peers as much as possible and enjoy their peers, and therefore if it's something that's very common for that social group, then we want our student to be able to participate and enjoy it as well. Or it increases inclusive opportunities. And I think those can go hand in hand as well. So you may choose more than one of these if needed. And here's where you kind of go and observe. Performance of peer person without disabilities. So we go and what skills are needed? Standing in line. Asking for the order. And so you would write everything that you observe people without disabilities doing in that environment. In this particular form, you would include the language right along your list. And you could almost do it like a task analysis, but it's an ecological inventory. What happens in that environment? What do people do? So if this were the midway of a carnival, what do you see people doing and saying, and list them all the way down? So here's where you describe the skill and you describe the language that is needed. You then watch your student, the student you're working with, and are they able to do this skill? A plus for yes, they can do this skill, or a negative for no, they're unable to do that skill. And if we find that they're unable to, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to teach them how to do that skill or to use that type of language? Are we going to adapt and make that particular skill that they do something else and adapt? Or are we going to support them in it? And depending on what we teach here, then what are we going to teach? How are we going to do it? Or what support is needed? So maybe people pick up their spoons to eat. Our students unable to pick up the spoon, so we'd have a negative here. We're going to adapt that. So we're going to put an A here for adapt, and the adaptation would be use a bigger handled utensil or spoon. We'd be adapting the spoon. Let's just pretend we don't feel like that even that would work. So people pick up their spoon to take a bite. Our student for some reason is unable to do that. They don't perform it correctly. And we as a team decide, you know what, we need to support. So we put an S here and we have somebody will feed the student. Those are some options we have. We always strive to have our students as independent as possible. Same goes for language. You would list all the skills. This again is the one I prefer that you use in your assignment this week. Below here we do see some examples. They've filled out a few for you. This is a 5th grade general education classroom. So our big environment is school. Our sub-environment is the 5th grade classroom. And we're looking at all the peers without disabilities within that classroom. And some of the things that we see happening is the students are looking at the teacher when the teacher's giving directions. The students are corally answering yes or no. The students are looking at the station when the teacher is giving directions as to what to do with each station. They're getting out their glue. They're viewing the PowerPoint in the lecture. They're looking at a box on the paper. They're looking at the station. They're able to go to the assigned station. They're able to glue a stamp to the paper, roll dice, and read the line. When we watch our student within this environment, we find that, yes, our student's able to look at the teacher. Our student is able to correlate answer yes or no. However, when we have joint attention here, when the student should be looking at the station that the teacher is talking about, we're seeing that they're not doing that unless they have prompting. And they're supposed to be getting out their glue. We find that, oh my, our student doesn't have glue available to them. And then we see that, yes, they are able to look at the PowerPoint in the lecture. When they're asked to look at the box on the paper again, they need that prompting. So we see that joint attention. They're maybe not understanding when they're to look at something else. However, they are looking at the station. They're able to go to the station to start. And then we got that glue stamp to paper that they needed support again. So when we look at these areas that the student is unable to do independently, we need to come up with a plan here, either to teach, adapt, or support. And so you would put, if you're going to teach, adapt, or support here, and you would basically put the plan in place here. How are you going to teach it? How are you going to adapt it? Or how are you going to support it? Here's another one that's done. This is the 8th grade general education, and their sub-environment was science class. And again, they go through and see what are peers without disabilities doing within that classroom, and then how is our student doing that, and there's some notes there. And again, you have to decide if you're going to teach, adapt, support, and how you're going to go about doing that. So these are some really good forms to use. I encourage you to use this form. However, make sure that you do not forget to put your language in here as well. I want to know what language, what vocabulary the student has to have in order to be successful in whatever environment you're doing. So make sure you include skills and language in this. Let's look at another example I have here for you. This is, and you have all of these under course content. This one is Ecological Inventory Appendix D. And here again, you see that we have a planned activity. This one is purchasing a snack. And so they have listed, almost like a task analysis, all the steps that need to happen when you're at the snack place to purchase a snack. And this is what typical students would do, and this is what our student does. And if you notice, our student is able to wait in line, and they're able to wait again to receive the item, but they are having a lot of difficulties in the middle. And so here they took notes of what was going on. They had their purse but not the wallet. They went down the wrong hallway. They needed prompting to scan the shelves. They needed to point to things that they wanted, so they weren't just saying what they wanted or pointing to what they wanted. Somebody had to prompt them to do that. And then again, teach the skill, use electric wheelchair with adaptive switch, teach school layout, so we have some mapping things, and how they're going to fix these areas or work on these areas so that the student can eventually be successful and independent, hopefully, purchasing a snack. So there's some ideas of what an ecological inventory is all about. The last form, I think we have covered all of these forms. I've also just given you, this is some information that is from another textbook on ecological inventories. So feel free to go through this, read up a little bit, find out the definition of an ecological inventory, when it was created, and what we use it for. I encourage you to read it all. I've underlined some areas that specifically have to do with ecological inventories. And again, you'll find this under course content. So you can go through and look at that. They are a very important part of what we do when we start working with students with multiple and severe disabilities. In addition, you will find a PowerPoint under course content that is all about ecological inventories. And I strongly suggest you look through that. It's called What Should I Target? Establishing Relevant Goals. But I have it under course content as Ecological Inventory PowerPoint. All right, thank you.